Hello and welcome to the 2022 North Little Rock Wastewater Chlorine Safety Training. My name is Justin and I am our Risk Management Plans Prevention Program Coordinator. Today we will cover some general information about chlorine, what our use is for it, and what to do in the event of an evacuation due to a chlorine leak. We use chlorine for disinfection by pumping it as a gas under vacuum into our final clarifier effluent. We detain the water for at least 30 minutes while any pathogens are eliminated by the chlorine. If you were to see chlorine outside of its container, it would be a greenish yellow colored gas. Inside of the container is stored as a liquid under pressure. In a tank rupture situation where the chlorine is escaping the container, you would be a gas because it would boil once it warms up higher than negative 29 degrees Fahrenheit. The gas would flow with the wind along the ground as it's 2.5 times heavier than air. If you were exposed to gaseous chlorine, you would feel extreme irritation and burning on your skin and eyes. If inhaled, it would cause respiratory distress and, depending on the concentration, may be fatal. Exposure to liquid chlorine, though very unlikely, could cause frostbite and chemical burns to the exposed area. Liquid chlorine, again, you can only have an exposure to that if you're very close to a vessel as an incident occurred. The chart to the right details various levels of concentration whose symptoms range from mild irritation at the low end to death on the high end. It's worth noting here that operations receives a low-level leak alarm at 0.3 parts per million, and the plant-wide alarm sounds at 3 parts per million. An improvement to our system that we've made in the last year is an automatic valve shutoff. A common industry-wide chlorine issue is a poor connection between the container's valve mating surface and the regulator. The issue can cause a low-level leak that goes undetected for hours until eventually building up enough gas that the alarm system triggers. With this new system, we place a valve actuator onto the container valve that is hooked up to our plant SCADA. When the sensor detects a concentration of 0.3 parts per million, the valve actuator will automatically close, giving the plant operators a chance to fix the issue before it becomes an even bigger problem. But in the event of a plant-wide alarm, it's important to know what to do. This is what it should sound like when you hear the chlorine alarm. When you first hear that, don't panic and run for the door. Instead, prepare for a possible evacuation by gathering your essential things and being ready to leave. Remember, the alarm goes off at only 3 parts per million, so just because you hear it doesn't mean you're going to be evacuating. The operators have 2 minutes to contact admin and confirm if there is actually a problem. Once the severity of the situation has been assessed, the operator will communicate with admin whether or not an evacuation is warranted. At this point, admin will give a go or no-go announcement over the desk phone intercom, and an operator will give the go or no-go announcement over the mass messaging system. When an evacuation is called for, do your best to observe the wind direction. You can look for the flags at admin or the windsock at the chlorine dock to help. Stay upwind of the leak as you make your way out. Part of what the operator is doing when determining the severity of the leak is observing the wind direction and communicating to admin whether the primary or secondary evacuation route should be taken. This is the Rose City Community Center, which is our evacuation destination. Once everybody's made it here, you should be gathering towards the back of the building around here, where supervisors or their designees will be taking a head count. As part of our hazard assessment for our RMP, I've modeled what the worst case scenario looks like. This is the area of the expected gas dispersal with an endpoint of 3 parts per million. To model this required simulating a 1¼ inch hole blown out of the very bottom of a full tank, so this scenario happening is extremely unlikely. The normal wind direction in our area would carry the gas cloud to the southeast. Of course, depending on the wind's direction in that moment, the gas dispersal could blow in any direction from the source point. So accounting for any possible wind direction, we can see that the Rose City Community Center still lies outside of the range of the leak in a worst case scenario. This is the alternative case scenario that our hazard assessment also requires us to do. In this model, the still unlikely but more plausible scenario of a 5/16 inch container valve blowing out of a full container is modeled. It still shows an endpoint of 3 parts per million, and as you can see, its length is significantly shorter. So based on those release scenarios, this is the primary evacuation route because it is the one that's most likely to keep everyone upwind of the gas. Turn left onto Bauckham from the plant until you get to Rose Lane and then take a right. The Rose City Community Center will be ahead on the right. If the wind is blowing in the other direction and the gas cloud is blocking the road, then you would want to take the secondary evacuation route. Turn right onto Bauckham and then turn onto 440 North. Take the next exit at Faulkner Lake Road and then turn left. Faulkner Lake eventually becomes Lynch Drive, but then just stay on the road and turn left as soon as you see Rose Lane. The community center will be on your left. So once you're safely evacuated, you may be wondering what happens to the operators. Well, the operators have a unique job in a chlorine evacuation and have their own protocols to follow. They'll serve as a line of communication between the situation and admin. They're assessing and addressing the leak. If they can't address the leak themselves, they'll be contacting the fire department. They make the decision on evacuation. They're briefing supervisors or their delegates. But once the operations supervisor or his delegate are on the scene, the remaining operators will be dismissed to evacuate with everyone else. At 5 Mile, White Oak, and Maumelle, the protocols are going to be pretty similar. The operator on duty there will assess a potential leak and make the call on if an evacuation is required. If it is, then the operator will evacuate anyone else at that plant. The evacuation site from these plants will be the Faulkner Lake plant. So to summarize the chlorine alarm evacuation process, the alarm will sound. You should prepare for a potential evacuation. Operations will contact the admin building within 2 minutes. Wait for a go or no-go announcement. If it's a false alarm or a no-go, you can return to your normal duties. If go, take the primary route. If that's not possible, take the secondary route. A mass text message will also go out to all utility cell phones and to those who have registered their cell numbers with the system. Go to the rear of the Rose City Community Center for a head count. Each department head or designee will take a head count. Do not leave unless you're released. Plant operations supervisor or a designee will call HR to notify when it's safe to return. All off-site employees during the evacuation will not be allowed to return to the plant unless it's been announced that it's safe to return. If we're unable to return, utility vehicles present will be used to take employees home. Plant operations personnel will remain on or near the site as per their emergency response plan. If you are not signed up to receive evacuation notices through the utility's mass text messaging system, but you'd like to be, please let us know. Your information is only kept on our local SCADA database and is not available online. These messages will either be chlorine or inclement weather utility closing related. See your supervisor for the form to sign up. If you have any questions or concerns about anything presented here today, feel free to contact me in person or at my email, jshahan@nlrwu.com. That concludes this year's chlorine training. Thanks for listening.